I was born in Lafayette, Louisiana, and except for some brief stints in New Orleans, I've lived in Lafayette my whole life. I actually was born at Lafayette Sanitarium in Lafayette on the site of an office in which I worked as an attorney later in life. Well, my parents were married after they graduated from SLI. My father came to school here from Opelousas, and they married and she became a teacher after her father told her not to become a secretary and work for some man, that she should become a teacher and educate children. And my father was in the Air Force, the Army Air Force, which the Air Force was not formed yet. And they lived in Hondo, Texas for a while when my mother taught, and he taught navigation for the Army Air Corps. And then she moved to Lafayette when he was sent over to China. And she had me in Lafayette, and I grew up in the home, as I say, with my grandparents and on their property ultimately. After the war, when he came back, he attended TULANE Law School on the GI Bill, and we lived for a time in New Orleans during that period. He came back to Lafayette, and he began his law practice and ultimately went to work for J.J. Davidson, and they formed the partnership, ultimately Davidson, Moe, Onebane, and Donahoe. Actually, I was raised by four strong personalities growing up. As I said, my family lived on the same property or in the same house for my entire childhood and youth. My grandfather was a very strict disciplinarian, and he was also an artist in addition to his other work-related activities, having done commissioned portraits. And so he really exposed me to my own talents in that field, and the appreciation for visual arts in general. My grandmother was the funmeister in the family. She really taught me a lot about joie de vivre like no one else could have. My father was very, very dedicated to his profession and was a wonderful dad, but he always said the law was a jealous mistress, which was something I learned to experience myself in later years. And my mother was also a disciplinarian, and she taught me a lot about moral conduct and honor, and stood me in good stead with that. Well, I started out at Mount Carmel girls' school and didn't really stay there very long. I had learned to read at home and learned to read continuing after the experience there and throughout the summer. And then I started Myrtle Place School in Lafayette, where they immediately put me into second grade because I could read. And had a little trouble with phonics and had to do a little summer school with that. But then I went on to the third grade, and then in the fourth grade I switched to Our Lady of Fatima School, where I stayed through the ninth grade. I was not particularly content there because there were so few students. The classes were like 30 kids, one guy maybe in the class, maybe two. I really wanted to go to Lafayette High for high school, and finally convinced my parents to let me do that. I wanted to have more choices of classes and maybe get into some of the advanced classes, which I ultimately did. And then I also really was lucky to win several awards. I was a high school favorite, most likely to succeed. I ended up winning the Journalism Award, the Art Award for Visual Arts, English Award, American Legion Award, and the Newcomb Award on graduation as a valedictorian with three other women. There were 4 valedictorians at Lafayette High that year, and I was happy to be one of them. The decision to go to the University of Louisiana, then USL, was an easy one. Because I was only 17 years old when I started summer school at UL. I started out in pre-med, thought I was just dead set to be a doctor. And as I went through the courses more and learned to hate organic chemistry, and also an uncle of mine told me he thought I was too feminine a girl to be putting up with what goes on at med school with the male students as opposed to the opposite sex. he thought I would not be happy there. And the more I looked at my scores on my aptitude test, I realized that that was my aptitude, was law. And so I switched over, was inducted into the History Honor Society, the Political Science Honor Society, and really ended up enjoying the pre-law club. Had good study groups with guys and girls, because there were a lot more guys in the political science department than there were women. In general, history pretty much was half and half. And ended up finishing and earning the credits for my degree in 3 years. And then I applied to Tulane Law School. But anyway, I had a wonderful, really, really wonderful reception at Tulane, which surprised me. Got to know some of the other women who were in other classes there, and have remained friends with a few of them. And I was really happy to be accepted by the men I was in school with. If they had some animosity, I never saw it. The professors were interesting about it. I was lucky enough to have some professors who were my father's teachers as well, and they were particularly interested in this novelty of my being there. I was elected as secretary of my class, my freshman, junior, and senior years, and was active in the participation with planning class activities throughout the years that I was there. I was, as I finished law school and was getting ready to pack up to come home before I started the bar study review course, I was in my apartment and I got a phone call from a young man, from a gentleman who told me that he was a Supreme Court judge in Louisiana and wanted to know if I wanted to have a clerkship with him for the following year. Well, I had already committed myself to the Davidson Moe Onebane Donahoe firm for the following year, and I really thought it was a joke. I thought it was one of the young partners at that firm calling me just to see how I would react, because I knew they were capable. And I really gave him a hard time about who he was. And so finally he said, really seriously, you know, this is just Judge so-and-so, and I'm not going to repeat his name, but anyway. And I told him, I said, well, I apologize for all of the inquiries, but I said, you know, I really wasn't sure. Since I haven't applied for the job, I was surprised that you called. And I said, I would love to be able to accept it, but I have already committed myself. And in retrospect, I realized I probably could have asked for a deferral from the firm commitment, but I just didn't see that that was the thing to do, so I said no thank you. Anyway, I started work with the Davidson firm. I was offered the same salary that I had been offered by the telephone company when I had graduated from college to do some work for them, and that was an unsolicited offer of employment as well. But anyway, I accepted that. That was fine, and I was also told that I would never be a partner, which I also accepted because I did understand that it was a bit of a novelty, as I was the first woman from Lafayette to come back to Lafayette and finish law school and practice law in Lafayette. So, I met my husband, John Lawrence Mendell, a petroleum engineer, through a client. And I found out later that one of my classmates, Tommy Gilbo, an attorney in Lafayette, and his wife had wanted to get us together before that even. And so we dated off and on, and one day out of the blue he asked me to marry him, and I knew he was the right one, and I said yes. And we married, and he was, at that time, he was still with Amarada Hess, and we had our first child, and he was being thought of as someone that they would like to transfer into higher positions with the company, and he knew of my desire to stay in Lafayette and my dedication to my own practice in Lafayette. And so he left Amarada Hess and bought a wholesale nursery business in Lafayette, and I was able to stay and continue my practice in Lafayette, which meant a lot to me. I sort of got the drift that there was something going on, that the firm of Davidson Moe Onebane Donahoe might end up splitting. And it did split, and the firm of Onebane, Donahoe, Bernard, Torian, and Diaz, McNamara, and Abel came into being. I was offered a partnership and was happy to take it. I was immediately put on the construction committee to oversee the build out of the space at the First National Bank Towers where we were moving. And I was very happy about that because one of the other thoughts I'd had in my life was architecture, which my father thought women shouldn't be doing at that time. So I enjoyed that thoroughly, and we moved there. I really had some interesting additional work that I did that was involved in the state of Louisiana political arena, though I had no political connections, as that was not something the firm was interested in anyone pursuing. But I was appointed to the Louisiana State Police Commission the very first year that it was in existence, and helped to write its rules for the state police officers and other personnel. I served. We were appointed because we were non-political. The whole commission was non-political. We had all gone to private universities in Louisiana, and we were like a court of first hearing for grievances by the troopers against the state of Louisiana, and our judgments were appealable to the Court of Appeals. I was a partner with the firm until 1994. In 1993, my husband, John Mendell, was diagnosed with stage 4 melanoma. And as his condition, he seemed to be fine on the surface, but the prognosis was not great. And as he worsened, I felt the need to spend more time with him and be more on call to go with him if he needed to go to California, where he was receiving some of his treatment. And so I left the firm and opened a small firm with just my paralegal and my secretary, and continued there with a scaled-down practice, dealing with issues for clients that I had had and some of the ones my father had had before me. And in 1995, not unexpectedly, but sadly, he passed away. A couple of years later, I ended up marrying a former client, Brian Carl Barnes. One of my early dreams in life was to spend time in the mountains. I absolutely fell in love with the West. I had cousins who lived out there, and every time that we went, I thought I would love to be able to have a home in the mountains someday. I never dreamed it would happen, but my husband and I decided to build a home in Angel Fire, New Mexico for vacation purposes. We had a wonderful time putting it together and picking out furniture for it, and everything was going fine. And the first time we actually went there for a summer visit, my husband ended up having carpal tunnel attack and ended up being disabled. And so that's when I really decided that I should probably cut back my practice even more so that I could spend time out there. And so I set up a home office in a corner of my house, and was able to do work there and keep in touch with clients, and came home monthly to see about meeting with them and doing other personal business that needed to be done in Lafayette. Was lucky enough to have some wonderful friends there. Spent about 13 years doing that, and recently sold the house about 3 years ago so that we could do some other traveling, which we are trying to fit in. My hobby, my best outside distraction from the law has always been art. I've had many occasions to use it for Mardi Gras crew costume design, for program cover designs, for actually did some ballet sets, some sets for a ballet company, which is now Lafayette Ballet Theater, hands-on set creation. Well, I'm very proud to have been granted an AV rating with Martindale Hubbell. It was a long time coming in a way, but I feel very flattered and honored to have gotten that. And it was really some attorneys outside my own firm who recommended me for that. You make your own fun, you make your own life. and I feel very good that I was able to create my own world, being able to enjoy my practice, enjoy my art interests, have wonderful marriages, beautiful and wonderful children and grandchildren. Really, when I think back on my life, I used to think, what if I had taken that clerkship? Well, I probably would have missed my 2 husbands and my wonderful children. And it really, what more could a woman have asked for in 1965 than the life I've had?